Good afternoon. It is another Get It Right Initiative GIRI forum, and today we're going to be hearing from Duncan Aspin, who's head of HSEQS and maybe a few other things. He'll fully introduce himself in a moment. At VolkerStevin, and myself, Rupert Shingleton. I'm at Kilnbridge, and both Duncan and I are board members at the Get It Right Initiative. And today's subject is reducing errors in construction through behavioural insights. What I'll do for you first, for those of you that are new to GIRI or it's your first forum, I will very quickly give you 3 or 4 moments on Get It Right Initiative, who we are, what we do, and what it's all about, and invite you after that to come and join us on the website, come and have a little look around. Duncan will speak for about 30 minutes or so. And then we will go into sort of 15 or 20 minutes of discussion and conversation as you all see fit. I would ask you to, usual stuff, keep your computers on mute there, but please do leave the cameras on. It's a bit easier to speak to a few faces around the edge of the screen. Please do put your questions or comments in the chat all the way through. And between myself and Susan, we'll try and convene those into some early questions, and then towards the end, when we do have a conversation, we might or might not ask you to come and speak to us direct. So let's just crack on then, if I may. Get It Right Initiative, back in around about 2015, the ICE undertook a bit of research into the cost of error, found out that it was a big number. Oh my lordy, what are we going to do about it? And the Get It Right Initiative was founded with the likes of Ed McCann, Emma Monahan of Graham's as the sort of early pioneers of it. And this is the sort of headline data that we got to, that somewhere in the order of 15 to 21% of a project's cost is waste as a result of error. And you'll all be familiar, direct cost of error, 5%. Maybe not. Indirect cost of error, the time wasted around redoing work, organizing things, unrecorded process waste, the bits and pieces that go around extra access, extra prelim, those things no one ever costs, and of course the residual latent defects that probably every contractor in the country has as a burden on their accounts. Root causes of error that came out of the report, everything that we all know about, but quite importantly, the root causes of error. Yeah, we all can look at the actual outline defect in the concrete or the damage to the paintwork or the settling tarmac, but really looking at the root causes is where we start to look at error, so that we're talking about reducing error as opposed to reducing defects. So moving forward, you know, over the last few years, GIRI's evolved a little bit, and this is where we sit at the moment with our strategic aim to improve construction productivity and quality and reduce cost and waste by eliminating error, and that's our target. A fairly unique organization with GIRI. We have around about 90 plus companies and bodies as members at the moment, and a fairly unique aspect that we cover all aspects of the construction industry, from the big government bodies, the Network Rails, the high-speed twos, close association with the Construction Leadership Council, through customers, clients, architects, all sorts of disciplines, tier 1, tier 2 contractors. We have some legal and insurance organizations as members, and what isn't on that list there, actually, we have quite a few technology companies that have joined us to try and really forward the digitization of the industry with this common aim of reducing error. So this is what we do. We do a lot of thought leadership. We do a lot of knowledge sharing, of which this is part, and we have the benefits over to the right-hand side there, whether it be productivity, safety, carbon, reputation. One of the key things that for you is that GIRI is really completely agnostic to the bandwagon you wish to jump on, as long as we're all directing ourselves towards that avoidance of error. So how do we do that? What do we do into the nuts and bolts? We have our leadership training courses, our training courses. We have leadership training, interface training, and the supervisor and manager training. All of those can be delivered either by GTC, the GIRI Training and Consultancy Division, or train the trainers, which any of you are welcome to put your people through to get trained. And even as we speak now, we're working with CITB to get a little bit of extra funding for operatives training, which has been on our original agenda a couple of years ago, but was just a bit too much, is real and live coming soon. We've got the GIRI framework, which is the product that we produced at the end of last year, which is a full business systematic process for taking an organization to really drive it through, so that we're not just talking about odd people out on projects or sites doing little tactical and operational level improvements, but to systematically really change your business. There are some enabling activities at the beginning of this which are free, or not free, but part of the membership for member organizations. And we can start to run some of those workshops and help your businesses get on the way. So please do show an interest in that and take this to your boardrooms if that's where you need to go to get going. We have the design guide, one of the early products around about 2019. We first managed to publish the design guide. It's been through an iteration early last year to kind of tweak it a little bit in response to some feedback. It's now available online and on the website, and there are some video training modules that go with it, which I think is really starting to crop up around about the industry quite frequently now. We've got several working groups. We've got an insurance working group, technology working group, the Building Safety Act steering group, and the Construction Leadership Council metrics working group. And these are all open to all of you. There's some reports coming out. There was a recent technology report came out just at the end of the springtime, which was really very impressive, and I'd commend it to you all. Collaborations, GIRI's working across the industry, as we mentioned. We have a lot of overlap with the CQI Construction Special Interest Group, do a lot of work with those people, the CQI Cross, which I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with, and we work very closely with those, which hopefully you will have seen. So that was a whistle-stop tour through what GIRI can and can't do, where it's at. Please do get involved and speak to either myself or Duncan, or contact us through the website afterwards. And with no further ado, today's special feature, I'll hand over, and Duncan, if you'd like to take the reins and take on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll just get to the right place, hopefully. Okay, right. So welcome, everybody. And thank you, Rupert, for that introduction. The session today, we're going to talk about exploring how we can drive meaningful change in the construction industry by really reducing errors through behavioural insights. And specifically, we're going to have a look at what's called the COM-B model as well. So before I do that, what I'd like to do is really cover three key points. The first of those will be the challenge that we actually face in the industry. The second of those will be, well, what can we learn about behaviour change that's happened in the industry around safety? And then we'll look at understanding the whole process of change and behaviour change as well. And then we'll look into the model. I'm hoping to get a bit of interactivity today. And I've never used WebEx before, so it'd be quite interesting to see how it works. If it doesn't work, we'll just crack on anyway. But let's have a see how we go. So let's start by understanding the challenge we face. And Rupert's just mentioned there the cost of error in the industry, up to 21%, which is a huge amount of money, but also, frankly, a huge opportunity as well. So this really is, I think it's 21 billion out of 100 billion, which is where we get the 21% from. But, you know, this isn't just about numbers, really. It's also about the reputation of the industry, you know, out in the wider world as well. So if you think about the Grenfell report from the inquiry that's just come out, one of the overarching features was the industry was called, well, it was described as a culture of complacency across many organisations And also a previous report a few years ago by Dame Judy Hackett, who was the head of HSE at the time, actually was really scathing about some of the attitudes and culture across some of those involved in construction. And she called it the corrosive effect of the lowest cost procurement culture, some of which you may recognise. So if we think about this, then this isn't just about a technical challenge, it's absolutely about a behavioural one as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to try the first bit of interaction here. So drinking water, you wonder where I'm going with this, but we're drinking water. I'm going to ask you if you know that drinking plenty of water each day, we say around 2 litres, don't we? But if you know that drinking water, plenty of water each day is good for you, please raise your hand. And I mean on the technical bit there, if you all know, should be a little hand thing at the bottom. So please raise your hand if you know that drinking water each day is good for you. I'm just going to see how you might not be able to see this. I don't know. I'm going to look at the participants on the right hand side. There'll be a bit of people understanding how to raise a hand, so it's good practice to start with, isn't it? So we're getting quite a few hands raised there out of that lot. More raising as we go. So whilst you're looking at raising your hands there, then what I'm going to do now is say, if you actually drink plenty of water each day, keep your hand raised. If you don't, put your hand down, which means just pressing the hand thing again. So if you don't drink plenty of water each day, put your hand down. And I'm seeing hands going down already. Okay, so this is interesting, isn't it? We've got a task here, which is, it's free to do. It's readily available. It's really easy to do. And yet, even though we know it's good for us, many of us don't actually manage to achieve it. You can all lower your hands now, unless you've got any questions. So let's have a think about that. If I think about myself, I'm always trying to actually improve the amount of water I drink. And I've got a drinking water cooler immediately outside my office, right outside the door. And yet I often walk 10 minutes down to Starbucks down the road to pay £4.50 for a coffee instead. And what this is just highlighting is the fact that change is not quick and it's not easy. But the thing with it is, what we tend to do is, even in much more complex change in our organisations, we often think that just by telling people what we want to do, that it's going to happen. I mean, perhaps we'll provide a little bit of training on top and then expect that change to happen. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of change programs actually fail to get off the ground, because there's that belief that change is easy, and it really isn't. It's not quick and it's not easy. So taking that then, what can we learn from the behavioural approach to safety in the construction industry? Well, you'll see on the right there, I think this is one of the reports that Rupert just highlighted. You can see on the right there a report by GIRI called The Strategy for Change. And this actually suggests that there's potential for looking at what we've done with behavioural programmes in safety in the past and adapting that or adopting it to apply to approaches to reducing error and improving quality. And the report also suggests that there's a lot of similarities. Because if you take, for instance, the frame of mind that an individual may have, where they're looking to have a clean and tidy site in order to improve safety. Well, is that any different to the frame of mind that a designer might have who wants to make sure that their details are clear and unambiguous to eliminate error? Well, I think the thing about behavioural change is that it's not specific to any particular task and could be applied to everything. So if we look at that, what can we learn from behavioural safety and behaviour change and the journey that the industry has taken through that we can apply to the construction industry? Well, if we think about it, probably the key message that's been used in safety in terms of behavioural terms is that it starts from the top. And frankly, any program that fails to get the buy-in at the very top of an organisation or even the top of the industry, we're talking industry-wide, is ultimately set to fail. This is why it's important, as Rupert mentioned before, that the GIRI membership involves key industry bodies, clients, contractors, designers, and others who have influences in the industry as well. And also the GIRI training that Rupert mentioned, the very first part of it is giving leadership training at the very top of the organisation, recognising that you must get buy-in at that top level for any change programme to have any chance of working. So let's just have a very short look at the behavioural safety journey that the industry has taken over the decades. And I mean a very short journey before we go into behaviour change steps. So we've probably been exploring behavioural safety in construction right the way back into the 1980s, really. And it's, in my recollection, it started to gain some prominence around the turn of the industry. And this is where people started, and organisations started to apply the ABC model of behavioural safety, which suggests that the antecedent, which is a thing that triggers a behaviour, then triggers an action, which then leads to an outcome or a consequence. And depending on whether that's positive or negative consequence will strengthen or weaken the opportunities or chances of that behaviour happening again. Now, not going to dismiss this model because it's one of the fundamental building blocks to what's called operant conditioning, made famous by Skinner all the way back in the 1940s and 1950s. And it has to be said, certainly in the early stages of construction and other industries, it was part of giving that first initial step change in our whole mindset towards safety. However, this model has several limitations that we need to consider when we're dealing with the complexities of human behaviour. And one of the major drawbacks of this model is it suggests that a behaviour is triggered by a single antecedent, a single trigger, which leads to a single consequence happening in a simple linear way. So what's wrong with that? Well, not only are there many factors that influence how any of us behave, but these factors can interact in quite complex ways. Just give you an example here. It doesn't matter about reading the wording behind this, but what this model here is showing is the typical interactions and influences that can be on an individual, resulting in a single unsafe behaviour. This actually comes from some research into unsafe behaviours in construction, published just back in 2022. So if we accept then that behaviours are not as simple as they're defined by the ABC model and are influenced by all these multiple interacting factors, what can we do? Well, again, in that Strategy for Change report by GIRI, it actually recommended that we make use of some of the sort of change management approaches that have been deployed in safety over the past few years. And there's no doubt that over the past few years that there's been a change in approach to improving safety behaviours, moving away from that traditional ABC approach, and now focuses much more on behaviour change, and specifically looking at creating the right environment which enables people to get things right. In fact, my own definition of behaviour change is it's understanding the influences on people and removing the barriers to change. So the challenge here is then, well, how do we understand what those influences are? And how do we understand what the barriers to change are, and how do we overcome them? So this is where we get into the process of behaviour change. And any behaviour change programme, I'm going to say any change programme, will actually or should follow these fundamental steps, as you can see there. And with all of these steps, another important factor is that the people who are going to be impacted by the change should be totally involved in developing that change, because that way you're going to understand what the problems are better, you'll get better solutions, and also people will have more ownership and accountability of that change because you own what you help to create. Now, another important step here is that you've got to start by identifying the problem in behavioural terms. Now, that might sound obvious, but there's so many times in change programs that I've seen that we fail to actually either clearly identify the problem or actually fail to identify it at all and jump straight into solution mode. You see it in safety all the time, where people just talk about poor safety, therefore we need to improve, or poor housekeeping, therefore we need to improve it. Well, that, unless we're really specific about the problem, then our solutions are not going to be as effective as it could be, and our program isn't going to be as effective as it could be. Now, the other thing I'm going to say around identifying the problem in behavioural terms, we need to be really specific. So I'm going to give you an example here. And the example I'm going to give is coming from a tool which is developed within the GIRI training that Rupert mentioned before. And the thing about this example, it can apply to anywhere in the project life cycle. So, and it relates to something called press pause to avoid error. Now, the point here is that if someone believes that a situation is arising where error could occur, then they should press pause to avoid error. So, for example, if there's a lot of design changes happening, for instance, it could be a point to say, hold on a second, there's a lot of change going on here. There's a chance that something could go wrong. Let's press pause to avoid error. So it's recognizing where there's a potential for error to occur in any number of different situations. Rupert just put up the 10 top root causes of error earlier on, and then pressing pause to actually reflect on that to make sure that error doesn't occur. So this is what we want to happen, but we have a problem here, and this is where we want to describe the behavior. And the way we're going to describe the behavior here is when there's a possibility that error will occur, we have asked the supervisors, in this case, on the projects to press pause to avoid error. But this isn't happening, and errors are still occurring. Now, you'll see straight away that that is a wider definition of a problem statement than we obviously sometimes get. In this situation, it might be just, nobody's actually doing this press pause to avoid error. We need to make sure they do it in the future. We need to have the detail. The better detail we've got, the more we can understand where the barriers to change may be. Once we understand the problem, we can then go to specifying the desired behaviour. And again, the greater detail we go into on this, the better. In the past, behavioural safety has been called pinpointing, but it's absolutely being specific about the behaviour, the desired behaviour we want to achieve. And you'll see in context on the top there where you should be including the what you want to happen, when you want to happen, where you want it to happen, who should be doing it, and how it should be done. So again, you'll see that what we've described here is a lot of detail. So each time, so the desired behavior that we're going to try and achieve is that each time there's potential for error to occur, the supervisor will press pause to avoid error. So you can see here already, we've got the time when we want it to happen, which is each time. We've got who we want to do it and what we want them to do. And then it says this will be done at the location of the work, so location, by identifying the potential reasons for why error might occur and asking the work team to pause and reflect before continuing. You might think, well, that's a flipping detailed explanation of what we want to achieve there. But honestly, the more we're specific about the thing we're trying to achieve, the better we can understand what the barriers to change are. So then, of course, we get into those barriers to change. And now we're going to have a look at how we can actually start to understand what the influences on people are and what the barriers to change are. This is where we bring in what's called the behaviour change wheel. Now, the behaviour change wheel was developed back in 2013 by Susan Mitchie and others from the University of Central London. And it was originally applied to the health sector, but has more and more been applied to many other industries, and I'm certainly seeing it become quite an active model in the construction industry as well. There are three elements to the wheel, and you've got the centre, which is called the hub, which is also known as the COM-B model, the bit we're going to focus on today. You've got the next ring, which is called intervention functions, or 9 intervention functions, but you can consider them to be just categories of potential solutions. And we're not really going to look at the outer ring much today, but they are ways of implementing change. So, as I said, we're going to have a look at the centre wheel, the centre part of the wheel today, which is called the COM-B model. And as you can see there, what it describes is that if you bring capability, motivation, and opportunity together, those are the three elements that create anybody's behaviour. Now, that's not only the behaviour that we want to achieve, but it'll also explain the behaviours that we're getting right now. So if we have a look at those three then. So capability. So capability, and bear with me on this, it'll become clear. I'm going to ask you to come up with some ideas in a minute. So under capability, that's further split down into physical and psychological capability. Now, physical capability is fairly straightforward to understand. I think it's around that, it can be eyesight, hearing, strength, dexterity, mobility, all of those sort of things. Whereas psychological ability, which can also be called cognitive ability or mental ability, it is very much around knowledge and skills, awareness, understanding, those sort of things. So what I've done here, I've put some bullet point prompts as to the things that actually constitute capability, both physical capability and psychological capability. Most of them are probably self-evident. One of the ones that perhaps isn't is cognitive load, where cognitive load is just basically how much we can take in at any one time. So if we couldn't, when it gets too much, it becomes cognitive overload. So there's lots going on, say, that can cause us a problem capability-wise. Then we have, so when we're looking at capability, that's very much looking at the individual or a group of individuals. When we look at opportunity, that's looking at the environment that we're creating. And it's again broken up into two, physical environment and social environment. Now, the physical environment, again, it is reasonably self-evident, so it's exactly that. It's the environment we're working in. It could be obstacles to getting to where we want to go. It could be the location of what we're doing. But also grouped into physical environment is the resources we've got, the tools and equipment we've got, and the time we've got to do it. And then you've got the social environment there. And social environment, really, in its simplest context, is the influence of others on the way we behave. So, and the two, in a work situation, you've got two particular groups of people, really, that are most influential. The people we work with and the people we work for. So that's the whole social element. And you can see some things down here around peer pressure, which many of you will be aware of, that can influence our behaviours. Norms, what we see already happening, what others are doing, or comparison with people like ourselves and others as well. And then we have the final category of sources of behaviour, which is around motivation. And it's split again into automatic and reflective. Now, automatic motivation is defined as unthinking. It's an unthinking action. It's where we just do something without thinking. It's a reactive thing. So if something drops, we go to catch it. It's like I say, it's unthinking. Habits come into unthinking reaction. So a habit is defined as an automatic, unthinking reaction. So what we've got to be careful with those sort of things is, if it is an automatic reaction, we can't tell people to just think more next time, because it's an unthinking reaction. But we also have reflective as well. Now, reflective is more about understanding or an understanding of what the outcomes will be and whether those outcomes are desirable. And that can be a really conscious thought, or it could be some semi-conscious or subconscious thought. So you've got loads of things on the motivation here in terms of, do we believe that this task is important to do in terms of this? It's press pause to avoid error. What do we expect of the consequences if we do it? Or actually, what do we expect the consequences are if we don't do it? If we remember that our behaviours are reinforced or weakened by positive or negative outcomes. What do we prioritise? Because one of the things about motivation and its influence on behaviour is it's very much what is happening at that moment in time which will be the strongest influencer. Not something we talked about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, or a training exercise we went on. Very much what's happening in the environment at that moment in time will change our priorities. Rewards are an outcome, an incentive can drive behaviour, and of course accountability and our beliefs in whether we're accountable for these things. And emotions can play a big part as well, depending on how we feel that day. So there's quite a lot to capture there. So what I've done here is I've given you some potential questions. So again, when you're working through, if you're ever working through the COM-B model, please do it with the people that will be impacted by the change. And you could get all of these bullet points on the left-hand side and change them into questions. But I've just, for ease, just created a few simple questions that you might ask at the top there. So remember what we're trying to do, the description of the desired behaviour on the top right, where each time there's a potential cause of error, potential for error, supervisor will press pause to avoid error. Done at the work location by identifying the potential reasons why the error might occur and asking the work team to pause to reflect. So it could be anything to do with location, it could be to do with the time, the person doing it, the people they're doing it with. So you could ask those people, well, do you know why this is important to do? Do you know how to do it? Do you have the skills how to do it? How have you got the physical capability? Now, here's where I'm going to ask you, and there might be a bit of a delay here. I wouldn't mind some comments based on those questions or anything that's down the left-hand side. What could be a potential barrier? What's one of the things that might be stopping supervisors pressing pause to avoid error? So think about all those. So I'm going to talk about ego, absolutely. Now, ego is an interesting one because potentially that comes into motivation. One thing you'll find when using the combi model is sometimes you'll come up with a potential barrier, which actually you think, well, does that go under that category or that category? Frankly, it doesn't matter because as long as you're actually identifying the barriers, then that's what matters. I'm going to pick up some of these as we go. We're going to come back to time pressure because time pressure is always an important one. It's always coming up. I don't know whether you can all see the comments on the right. You can open your comments box up. But time pressure we'll come back to because that's very much an opportunity thing. Have we got the time to do it? Being battered over the head by paymaster for stopping work. Yeah, absolutely. Again, what I'll say though, that comes under the motivation element potentially. It could come under two. It could come under top opportunity because remember we talked about peer pressure or the influence of others. So we're very much influenced by, as it says here, the paymaster, the person we're working for. But equally, we're motivated by pay as well, of course. We've got they're not actually able to control their workers. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? In terms of have they got, now this is definitely a capability one, have the supervisors actually got the ability and the skills to actually control the workers? Getting sacked, that'll be a motivation one, there's no doubt about it. Focused on other things, so that could be a capability one, so there's too much to focus on. Or it could be a motivation one where there's other priorities. Confidence is a huge one here. In the psychological circles, that's, I was going to tell you what it's called and I've forgotten, but confidence, no, I've forgotten what it's called. But confidence is a really key one. It can come into capability, but it can also come into motivation because you can actually be overconfident as well as underconfident. Not wanting to take ownership, yeah, a motivation one. Please remember these for when we come to the other categories. Yeah, bonuses, deadlines, poor conflict management. Love that one. Do you imply there would be blame operatives? Blame's a huge one, isn't it? You need to create that culture and environment where people believe that they can raise issues without it becoming their problem, without them being blamed. Social differences, huge between supervisors and boots on the ground, and cognitive overload is a big barrier when supervisors and others are working out of position. Yeah, cognitive overload for all of us can be huge because there's so many things going on all the time. So fantastic, really brilliant response there. What I've done, just in case there wasn't any response, but let me just go through it anyway. I've come up with a few myself as well that could happen. So lack of awareness. The supervisors are not aware of when they need to press pause because they don't recognise the potential for error. What I will say is that a GIRI training, particularly supervisor and manager training, actually helps supervisors to understand where those potentials arise. Cognitive overload has already been mentioned here. When supervisors are dealing with multiple tasks and don't notice when there's that need to change, to pause to reflect. Inadequate skills, I think this one was mentioned too. Supervisors don't have the necessary skills to analyse situations effectively, leading them to proceed without considering, and that one was definitely raised. So we're going to do the same, and some of these have already been mentioned, but please feel free to mention them again in this category. I'd like you to do the same again, but I'm just going to explain this again. feel free to write them up anytime as I'm talking here. In terms of physical and social opportunity, you've got the list down the left-hand side there. But you've also got some potential questions you could ask. Do you have the time, resources, and equipment to do this? Do you believe important others, remember important others, people we work with, people we work for, see this as important? Do you see others doing it? Are there physical barriers to doing it? So is there any thoughts on this? So I've got one here. In my experience, it's always the CAD team's fault. Yes, or the designer's fault, yes. So what we got here, cultural issues within the organisation. Yeah, of course, they're going to have an influence, aren't they? Because the supervisor will be influenced by those as well. But it goes back to the paymaster thing, you know, and what I said at the beginning, you know, you've got to start with the top of the organisation. If it's not being led by the top of the organisation, it will always fail. Poor planning and programme. And interestingly enough, when Rupert brought up the top 10 causes of error earlier on, the top cause of error is poor planning. Or the geologist's fault. So it's all the early stuff, isn't it, which is getting in the way of error. The norm, so easy to say design error. Yeah, it really is. And sometimes it's design error, sometimes it isn't. But what I'm going to say, though, is it's so easy to blame others. I think that's what we're all very good at, aren't we? Opportunity, invest in people to gain loyalty and teamwork. Interestingly enough, this happens, by the way, but what we've got there is somebody coming up with a solution, which is great. What I would always recommend when you're doing these approaches, don't drift into solution mode at this time. Just stick with what the problems are, and then we move to solution mode later on. I'm going to do one more here, which loyalty and teamwork, huge. That's going to have a huge influence on the team. Is going to influence, so it's going to influence how everybody in that team behaves. And personnel working outside the knowledge base in a way that comes back to capability. If they haven't got the knowledge, then they're not going to be able to do this. So I'm just going to give you some examples that I did here. I'm just going to keep a check on time. We're not going to have the 30 minutes of questions and answers, but we're doing the interaction as we go, I think. So time pressure. Supervisors feel they don't have enough time to pause and reflect due to tight deadlines and fast-paced working. I think that was mentioned earlier. Distractions in the environment. It's difficult for supervisors to focus and recognise the need to pause due to noises and chaotic environments. Peer pressure. Colleagues who don't value this very much comes into that team ethic. Don't value the press to pause error and the influence by others to skip this step, creating the environment where pressing pause is actually seen as potentially counterproductive. It certainly can happen. So let's do the last one there quickly then, which is around motivation. So again, you've got lots of things down the left-hand side you can use there as prompts. Or you could ask these sorts of questions. Would you feel you'd want to do this? Because it might be, let's go back to the drinking water one. Sometimes when people don't drink water because they don't want to. What are the consequences of doing it or not doing it? And by the way, you can have positive consequences for not doing it as well as negative ones, and vice versa. Is there something more important to them? Are there current habits and practices that stop it happening? Would they feel supported in doing it? I think some of that's already been brought up or before. So let's have a see what we've got here. Supervisor may struggle with her, and I try to read these behind the thing that keeps coming up, with her health and external factor. External factors are huge and can have often not that difficult to see, not that easy to see, should I say. I think poor planning and design error often. Here's somebody who's been on the GIRI training, unable to think through all interfaces, components and sequences required. That could be a capability thing as well. Attitudes, definitely in motivation through ignorance. Not my problem. So not my job. That's that accountability thing again there, isn't it? It's not my job. It's somebody else's to do this. Why should I get involved in this? Program pressure, toxic culture, expectations and consequences the industry accepts. Yeah, we've really got into that acceptance of errors happening and anticipates error at a cultural level. So why should we do anything different? I'm going to do one more. When you were paused to prevent error, no one knows because nothing went wrong. That's a really good point. How to reward nothing happening. You know, I'm just challenged at the moment with saving £1 million through reducing error. in our business, and I'm thinking, how do you prove that you've stopped it happening? So it is a really good one, but there are ways that you can create an identity around this which motivate people to want to do it. So I'll just go you through some potential ideas. We've got more coming up there, which is brilliant. So there may be conflicting priorities, because priorities change all the time. Supervisors prioritising completing the task quickly over accuracy, especially as they are measures on output rather than quality. Some of you brought that sort of thing up already. Accountability, there's a lack of ownership. Supervisors don't feel personally responsible for errors, so lack the motivation to take the time to pause. That's accountability and responsibility thing that was mentioned. Habits, supervisors are used to just crack it on, frankly, completing the task in that routine way without actually reflecting. Supervisors got to get the job done. That's what we always see, give the message. There's more coming up around culture of doing the least we can get away with. Absolutely, I'm afraid that does seem to be the case in our industry. So, flown through that, but I've now collated all those into one page, not for you to read necessarily, but just to say, if you think about where we started out, and we have a problem with supervisors pressing pause to avoid error, and what would quite often happen is that when you've had the training, make sure you do it from now on. I want to see more press pause to avoid error happening. But if we haven't understood and recognise the reasons why it's not happening, then we're always going to have a difficult task in getting this to happen and be sustainable. And this can happen with any change. So if you look, just by doing a quick exercise, the amount of barriers that you've come up with yourself, just a few that are identified here, you then prioritise some of these barriers to see which ones you want to focus on. And you might even ask again, which do you think of these are the most important to overcome? Now, okay, so you now know what the problem is, but that's great, but what do you do about it? Well, quite often, once you've got the problems, the solution becomes quite intuitive. It's quite often the opposite to what the problem is. So having that problem there can really help you understand, what do I need to do? And it's always more than just training. And so you've got lots of things that we could do here. What I am going to say though, I mentioned the behaviour change wheel is actually just the combi model. Now, don't worry about this too much, because most of the time when I use combi, I just automatically use the problems to develop solutions, working with the people who are going to be affected by it. But you can, and I would suggest you need somebody who really understands the behaviour change wheel to do this, use the second layer of the behaviour change wheel, which are called the intervention functions. And behind each one of these, I'm going to call them categories now, are 93 potential behaviour change techniques that are available within the behaviour change wheel. So there's lots of different things and techniques that can be utilised. You see them down the left-hand side in basic headings. Now, like I say, I'm not trying to educate you in the behaviour change wheel today, but what I've done, just to show you what can happen, is I've taken one of the barriers to change out of each one of those capability, opportunity, and motivations, and I've worked through the whole behaviour change wheel, which does take some learning to do. So if you look at capability, lack of awareness of when to press pause because people don't recognise the potential for error. This comes under the education element, which is important, and it's called, the behaviour change technique is called information about antecedents. But basically what we're doing here, so what we're going to do, and there's guidance on each one of these, we're going to provide training sessions to educate supervisors on the common scenarios where errors are likely to occur, which is something, by the way, we do in the GIRI training. Opportunity, we've got time pressure, as always mentioned. Supervisors don't feel they have the time to pause and reflect. This is under environmental restructuring because time comes under environmental barriers. So we're going to restructure that physical environment. So here we've said, well, we'll include built-in time buffers or pause points where supervisors are encouraged to pause and assess the situation. So I think you build them in, give them the capability to do it. And then over time, by building them in, they could become habit anyway, and then you no longer need to do that. And motivation, we mentioned there was comments about lack of ownership. Supervisors don't feel personally responsible for errors. So we were doing a persuasion category here. And this one's called identify identity associated with change behaviour. So you kind of create an identity with people. Ego was mentioned right at the beginning. So what we're going to do here is encourage supervisors to take personal responsibility for quality outcomes by really framing them as key contributors to success of the project. Now, you're the supervisors, you're going to make the biggest difference on this project. We really need your help. And by the way, that we really need your help statement, which I call a vulnerability statement, is really good way of actually getting people bought in and wanting to help. So that was really quick. You do need quite, that last bit, you do need quite a bit of training to understand that. But you can just go through the combi model. You've all just done it quickly within that chat. And then once you've got the problems, work out the solutions from there. But also, as Rupert mentioned early on, the GIRI have an error reduction framework which can be used in organisations. As you can see there, it's a standardised, structured step-by-step process that can be used by companies, organisations and projects to either systematically identify, diagnose and reduce errors. So this can be done on specific errors or over a wider project culture and behavioural change approach. And there's the expertise there to support this. Now, the reason I mention this, because one of the tools in there actually very cleverly uses the center part of the behavior change wheel, which is a combi model, and changes it into a GIRI maturity matrix. It's quite clever, this. And so it's one part of the tools as part of this error reduction strategy. So it's splitting up the different elements, some of which I gave you in the bullet points down the left-hand side, to be able to measure the organisation's and individuals' abilities, capabilities, environment, etc., amongst the organisation. And then by doing that, being able to create a maturity level for the organisation, then going through the whole change process through that error reduction strategy, and ending up with hopefully being able to measure through the maturity matrix again, and coming hopefully through it all a better score. So what I'm going to do there, so whistle stop tour. When I do the behavioural change training, normally I do a day's course on this. So you've had about 40 minutes, but I think from the comments down the right side, you definitely started to grasp that whole combi thing. So what we're going to do now is, I'd like to know what questions you've got. You can either put them in the comments, or if you feel brave enough, turn your camera on and speak. I'm happy either way. So what questions have you got?
Excellent. Thank you, Duncan. That's fantastic. So we'll hopefully someone will stick their hand up, and Susan will perhaps see it, or please do get some questions going in there. But just whilst we're waiting for that, I'll just sort of reflect on that and say thank you very much, Duncan, for that, which was very, very interesting. I'm familiar with the COM-B model, but I have to say only from the GIRI maturity matrix, and so I was pleased to get that bit of education on the basis behind it. And I will have to go away and see if I can work on my 93 techniques. Did you say? I'll be some time
so
before I'm mastering all of those. I don't doubt.
Well, to be honest with you, you don't need to become a master in them because they're there listed. They're actually a separate document to the behaviour change wheel, but they're referred to in the behaviour change model. And you do need a little bit of knowledge around psychology, I'll tell you, for that bit, if I'm honest with you. But they are reasonably intuitive as well.
Excellent.
So
we've got a question come up there from Mark asking about how does this relate to other practices such as the "don't walk by" model, which again is very prevalent in the health and safety world. Do you want to just speak to that one for a moment for us, Duncan?
I'd love to. So what I'm going to say for a start, and this goes back to the early process of behavioural safety and this "don't walk by" approach. What I'm going to say is, in terms of behaviour change, "don't walk by" doesn't tell people what you want them to do. It tells them what you don't want to do. So what would be a much better approach from a behaviour change point of view is describing in detail what it is you want people to achieve. So if I give an example, we say, if you see something wrong, and even something wrong is a little bit generic, but if you see something wrong, please stop, speak to the person and have a conversation about what you... So I'll always stress, it's better to tell people what you want to happen rather than what you don't want to happen. So hopefully that answers Mark's question. But you may even, why are people not working to "don't walk by"? Do a combi on it. Do a combi. What have they got the capability to understand why they might need to not walk by, what the issues are, Do they feel confident in doing it? Does everybody else do it? You know, are they motivated to do it? You can start to ask all those sort of questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Duncan. Now, we've got a very interesting question from Mark here at ReviCheck. So we'll come to you in a moment, Duncan, whilst you read it for a moment. And you're referring to ISG there. Thank you for that. And of course, our sympathies to anybody who was involved in that.
Yes, absolutely.
Since the very early days of GIRI, we had a very quick realization that the people that were turning up at our events were all the quality managers. And we're like, where are the bosses? Where are the people with the influence on what happens in these businesses? And it is indeed an issue. And you'll see at the very beginning of the GIRI framework, the step before step one, the magic step before step one is indeed gain leadership support and that sort of thing. And one of the things that GIRI is doing on that is working with people like the Construction Leadership Council and government bodies to try and really understand what is motivating the businesses, and certainly through infrastructure, which is a huge part of our industry, how we motivate, make sure that the business model is right. And through GIRI, we're influencing that through things like the development of the GIRI metric, or whatever our universal metric for error might be, to try and use that. And if your metric is in the right place, we might not have retentions in the industry, because we know that that's a key business factor that goes through. So there are a number of things that GIRI is looking at that are trying to get into the boardroom, is the term that we use, to start to try and get that little hook in there. And we'd be very pleased to engage in any ideas you've got after this. Please do come back, because we've been working on it for a few years, and whilst we're making some progress, a long way to go. Would you like to just reflect on that as well, Duncan?
Yeah, in terms of because there's a couple of questions there that relate to kind of like the top management and boardroom. And it's interesting when we talk about leading from the top, and what I've recognized many times myself, even when you believe or top leaders believe that leading from the top, it's because they're the ones giving out the message. But giving out the message isn't sufficient. They have to be exhibiting the behaviors. You know, just even when leading from the top, it always seems, well, not always, that's wrong. Often seems to be, I'm leading from the top, I'm telling you that it's important. But leaders have to be exhibiting the same behaviours. It's absolutely essential. This isn't about pointing at other people and what they need to do. In terms of just picking up again on that boardroom aspect, I think one of the questions is, if you were trying to promote GIRI within the boardroom, how would you do it? Well, I've done exactly that personally myself. And to be honest with you, I didn't do it from a moral point of view. I did it from a commercial point of view. So there's 21% cost of error here. Construction industry, about 2% margin, sometimes a little bit more, but not a lot. So I basically said, all the things we're trying to do to improve margin, just reducing error would outweigh all of them. And we certainly got buy-in into our in our business, the business I work for, from that point of view, to the point where they've now given me a new job at reducing error in our business. But so that's
it's a great point, and thank you for that. And I think, you know, it's interesting. You know, Tom has picked up and said, you know, tough regulation and all that sort of thing. You'll have noticed in the little slides I did at the beginning, we've talked about the benefits, whether it be safety, quality, productivity, reducing carbon. There's a popular statistic that we have that nominally 40% of accidents and incidents are returning to do rework and defects to correct error. So there are the other end of all those benefits is the lever that you might go at to do stuff. And certainly where I'm working, we have a couple of our customers that have gone deep in the carbon reduction, because that suits the motivations of that business, and that sort of thing. And so obviously the error reduction is going to reduce the amount of rework and the wasted materials, which really ticks the box for that customer. So in answer to that question, folks, the money, the commercial aspect just seems to make so much sense. But if there are some other levers that are hitting, especially if you go to a boardroom, you've got influential people, especially on the climate agenda, which is very powerful, have a little tickle on them as well to influence the finance director or whatever on those other things there and now. And please, we'd be very happy to speak to you about those. And indeed, and any of us as board members and that as GIRI are perfectly happy to come and talk to any of your boardrooms as we go. So I'm just going to have ask Duncan.
Rupert, there's a couple of questions I'd like to pick up on.
Yes, I was going to say, have Rupert, a couple more then. Please do go on.
Yeah, there's a couple that I'd like to just catch up on that are in there. One which says, have you got any examples of where this has worked? And the other one is around more legislation. Talked about corporate manslaughter and do we need more legislation? I'll tackle the last one first. I think the health and safety work Act of 1974 made a huge difference to many, many industries and to safety in general. I personally don't think more and more legislation is going to make a difference, because ultimately, it's just like any behaviour, people don't think it's going to happen to them. It's always a consequence that the people don't believe will really happen to them. Yeah, it has some motivation and so it does change behaviours to some extent, but it's always, I think, not going to happen to me, so it's not going to motivate me. We really need to get to the crux of culture and behaviours, and do a combi model on your board if you want a particular challenge. Just the other one, which said, have you got any examples? Plenty. I can give you an example of doing it on a very specific task, which was around, okay, it's a safety one, plant and people, it was around plant inspections where they weren't happening. We went through a whole combi model about why they weren't happening with the plant operators, came up with some fantastic solutions. Also done it on a cultural aspect, trying to change the culture and behaviours around digital integration in an organisation. So it can be used across a wide spectrum. I've got many more examples, but we are running out of time. So I think at that stage, I'm going to pass back over to you, Rupert.
Well, I think, thank you ever so much. And I think the key thing there, everybody, is that we really could go on all day. And I'd really encourage all of you, you probably saw a few connections there. You can get in contact with any of us at any time through the website or LinkedIn or any of those other connections. There will, Susan will be popping a little post up within the next 24 hours, no doubt, saying, what a great forum. Thanks everyone for coming. So please do jump in the chat. Let's keep talking about all of this. We've got another members meeting in about another 2 or 3 months' time, whatever it is. It will be in London up until we find enough of you all out around the provinces to do a regional one. But please do just get involved, start the conversation. And one thing I can promise you is that both the formal members of the GIRI board, but also absolutely everybody that I've ever met at one of these forums or at one of our meetings is more than happy to come to your business, share each other around about this, and really just be part of it. And as Steve is just saying, let's take it seriously and we'll do something about it. And if you meet people at any GIRI event, we really do take it seriously and we'll go out of our way to help you. So on that point, I'd like to thank Duncan very much for taking the time to do the preparation. Thank you for Susan for doing the organising. Thank you very much to everybody that's turned up and contributed to the chat. Please do keep the conversation going. And on that, we'll say thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend. Keep safe, and we'll see you at the next event.